The Starside Prophecy by Tirri. Read by the author. Chapter 52. The Gathering. Melchizedek had his back to the elevator when he heard it chime. Cain, dressed casually in black pants and a white polo, coughed and waited to be asked in. When Melchizedek beckoned him with a barely perceptible hand gesture, he made his way across the room. Without looking, Melchizedek said, "All's well in Parish 9, I take it?" "Yes," said Cain, knowing that the summation the godson required was not necessary because he already knew those details. But the godson liked the process, and so Cain was obliged to summarise anyway. "The suicide rate this year has been at an all-time high. 98% of this year's flock are back in utero, and communications are already busy answering the prayers of the respective mothers, many of whom are asking for boys. 67 mothers have felt their fetuses already kick, and several miscarriages have already occurred, the result of unreasonable levels of fear on the part of those who conceived out of wedlock. The other 2%? They are in the caves. Have rescuers been sent in? They are on the way." "Excellent," said Melchizedek. Cain had learned to go along with these superfluous exchanges, which, according to the godson, kept everything very human. Cain knew full well what Melchizedek spent most of his time doing, but he asked anyway. "So what have you been up to?" Cain waited politely for the answer. "Keeping an eye on things," responded Melchizedek. "The 7 billion souls, most of whom do not have the slightest idea of who they are, keep me on my toes." "Well, when the future comes to pass in the manner you pledged, the number of souls you currently fuss over will dramatically decrease. And then what will you do?" "What else?" said Melchizedek. "Create a new process, a more refined process, using the same substance out of which I myself emerged. Consciousness will eternally expand, and I have a few very interesting ideas up my sleeve as to how and when that will happen. Come, Cain, let's sit." Cain walked with the godson towards the oyster table. No doubt Melchizedek had very big plans for himself, but talking about some future moment was seldom something that a mind that lived in the now moment was inclined to do. Cain pulled out one of the chairs and sat down, and Melchizedek did the same. When the elevator chimed, both looked up as Alusha stepped out. She never waited to be asked in. Alusha was wearing a sheer white floor-length dress and matching ballet slippers, the usual accompaniment of her clicking heels missing. As she neared the table, Melchizedek stood to embrace her and then tapped the seat next to his. "Jan is not with you?" "You know he's not. He sends his regards. He was looking forward to seeing you." "And I am looking forward to seeing him too," said Melchizedek, who knew precisely where Yanni was, how long he would be gone, and the amount of willpower his brief and unexpected assignment would require. Alusha had been disenchanted by Yanni's sudden departure, but she had been quick to adjust. Both had a level of responsibility that had to take priority over their private indulgences. Being a consultant meant that Yanni was frequently called to wherever his skill set was required, without much notice. Alusha would hear from him when whatever required his attention had abated. As Alusha sat down next to Melchizedek, she noted that something positive had obviously taken place in his inner world. The godson looked like a child who had just torn open a piñata full of candy. Alusha had questions about the cause of that look, but she was comfortable biding her time. A Japanese teapot and 3 matching cups appeared on the table. The traditional Satsuma design uniting each of the delicate pieces was quite beautiful. Alusha poured the green tea with the same exactitude as a geisha she had once been. She pushed one of the cups across to Cain and the other towards Melchizedek. "You make a fine sabaruko, Alusha," said Cain, "though I don't know how you can drink that stuff." Alusha laughed and quickly materialised a large mug of thick black Arabian coffee. She pushed it towards Cain. "Is that better?" "Much." Alusha pinched the tiny handle of the cup with her forefinger and thumb and brought it to her lips. She blew gently on the steaming liquid, thinking that the various teas she had been growing on her roof terrace would soon be ready to sample. Again, the elevator chimed. Salvatore, wearing an open-neck white shirt, a navy blazer and beige chinos, was the next guest to arrive. He stood in the doorway and bowed. "Salvatore," called out Kane. "Nice to see you wearing something other than scrubs and an apron." "Just for you, Kane, just for you," said Salvatore, stepping forward. He approached the table clutching an enormous bouquet of black and white striped roses. He knew Alucia would receive them with her usual childlike delight. As he skirted the table, Salvatore noticed the twinkle in Melchizedek's eye. "Well, you look the happiest I've seen you in 2,000 years. What's cooking?" "Ah, wouldn't you like to know?" responded Melchizedek sheepishly. Alucia stood to give Salvatore a kiss, making a long drawn-out sucking noise as she did so. "Thank you, Sal. They are absolutely beautiful. I have never seen a white so crisp or a black so austere." The fact that Alucia could manifest anything from unrefined energy did not make the slightest bit of difference. When a man presented her with flowers, she swooned. Alucia smelled each rose one by one, and then she snapped off the largest bloom and stuck it through a strand of hair behind her ear. She had already materialised a glass vase that resembled the many heads of a serpent, and she placed each stem in its own water-filled cylinder until the arrangement resembled the head of Hydra. Alucia pushed the vase into the centre of the table. The vociferous arrangement complemented the soft creamy shell surface. Then she tilted her head questioningly, pouting her lips in mock sadness. "Salvatore, you're all alone. Where's Florence?" "Alucia, my love, perhaps I am in need of a night off. An old man has to recharge his batteries from time to time, you know." Kane laughed and stood to embrace Salvatore, who had walked around the table to greet him. Their professional paths seldom crossed, but they embraced each other like long-lost brothers. Melchizedek remained seated, and Salvatore high-fived the godson as he made his way to the seat opposite. They saw each other frequently because, when the most ravaged of lost souls arrived home, Melchizedek often liked to show up. "What's your poison, Sal?" asked Alucia, smiling. "I know it's not coffee." "No, but it does start with a C." A bottle of Chianti appeared in an ice bucket next to an oversized wine glass with the initial S etched into it, the same glass he sipped from every night. "Well, that's perfect for me," he said. "Now what about you lot?" Grinning broadly, Salvatore materialised a bottle of champagne and several flutes that he filled and passed around to the others, except Kane, who was still sipping on his coffee. "Well, what or who shall we toast?" asked Salvatore, raising his glass. "I know," said Alucia. "Let's toast to the foggy road home becoming clearer for everyone who so far have not been able to see the signposts." "And those who can't see," said Salvatore, as always, sticking up for the underdog. "Let's toast to their guiding light being stronger than it's ever been." "Cheers to that," said Melchizedek. Everyone raised their glasses, and Kane his mug. As the conversation turned to the recent more dramatic events on Earth, the elevator chimed again. Justinian and Gwenolyn emerged, holding hands as always. Gwenolyn was wearing a white silk crop top and a pair of mauve chiffon bell-bottoms, and Justinian was wearing what looked to be the distinctive wardrobe of a magistrate, minus only the bulky white wig which he had stuffed inside his breast pocket. He was scheduled for a drop-in later that night and had prepared for the mission ahead of time. As Justinian and Gwenolyn walked across the room, Salvatore shook his head. He had never seen two souls more physically, emotionally, and more permanently entwined. "Hi, Sal," said Gwenolyn, detaching herself from Justinian and walking up behind him. Salvatore kissed Gwenolyn's hand, taking his time, and then said, "How's my favourite KD doing on this spectacular evening?" "Couldn't be better. And what has my favourite chef been cooking when not ministering to the monsters I bring home?" "Don't hang on to a hard heart, Gwen. I've told you it's not becoming of one so sweet. Remember, there are no monsters, just works in progress." "Just kidding, Sal. I love all monsters, all of them, especially Spanish ones. How's he doing, by the way?" Slipped my grasp." "Oh, that sucks." Melchizedek stood up and welcomed Gwenolyn with outstretched arms and a wide grin. "You look sensational as always." Kane welcomed Gwenolyn with a loving but brief bear hug, which she felt honoured by, and then Alucia kissed her on both cheeks and slapped her rump as she took her seat. Justinian was greeted with a kiss from Alusha and a robust handshake from the males, who had all honed in on his dandy costume and made comments ranging from the rude to the semi-pornographic. "You're all just jealous," said Gwendolen, defending her boyfriend's appearance. She then looked across the table at Melchizedek and studied his face. The twinkle in his eye was unmistakable. Gwendolen took a sip of the champagne that had just materialised and smiled at the godson, extending the unspoken invitation that he may go ahead and make his usual inquiry. "All remains equitable in your area of expertise, I hope?" "Of course," said Gwendolen. "Karma is being dispensed with absolutely no collateral damage. All is exactly and precisely as it should be, fair and unbiased and even-handed." Gwendolen had made this speech 1,000 times, but did not mind acquiescing to Melchizedek's desire for the assurances he did not need. "Wonderful," said Melchizedek. "You've been spending a lot of time up here, haven't you?" said Gwendolen, smiling. "Yes, I have." "A little too much, maybe?" Melchizedek had long since delegated many of his tasks to others and was the least active of the administration. This freed up his time so he could pay attention to the lives and destiny of his creations. Alusha laughed. "I wouldn't bother Gwen, he's a voyeur through and through, nothing can pry him away." "C'est la vie," said Gwendolen, glancing across the room to the eye. "Each to their own. And Cain, how about you? Are you going to join us, or are you going to poop the party and nurse that coffee into eternity?" Cain dematerialised his coffee mug and replaced it with 2 pints of Guinness with thick, creamy heads. The second was for Thaddeus. A pint of Guinness would no doubt be the first thing on his mind. On cue, the elevator door chimed, and without looking up, Cain said, "Speak of the devil." Thaddeus stepped out of the elevator, his girlfriend Lorena clinging to his arm. She looked as nervous as she felt. Lorena looked around the room she had never glimpsed before. She thought it enormous and creepy. The only pieces of furniture were an organ and a huge white table in the middle of the room, and enveloping it from all directions were life-size statues that looked more real than they should. Lorena let out a high-pitched screech when the severed head of Goliath rolled towards her. Thaddeus darted a quick look at Melchizedek, whom he knew to be the culprit. The head promptly rolled back to where it had come from. Then Melchizedek, through a smirk, said, "Lorena, bienvenido, ¿cómo estás?" Thaddeus cringed. He had not expected the godson to say something so soon. Gwendolen immediately put 2 and 2 together and realised she had been naive to think that Lorena's trip to Spain would remain discreet. Lorena bit her lip, now understanding that all her plans for broaching her mistake with Melchizedek were naive. She had understood what Melchizedek had said, but felt impotent to respond. What could she say anyway? "Don't smack me, Daddy. I won't do it again." Lorena wished she had never agreed to accompany Thaddeus, and then wished the floor would swallow her up. "Be careful what you wish for, Lorena. Dreams come true in this place," said Melchizedek, pretending to have read her mind. Thaddeus glared at the godson in mock disdain. He was used to his antics, but Lorena was not. The alcohol he had given her back on the terrace had initially accounted for her Dutch courage that had got her this far, but it had worn off when Melchizedek had spoken to her. Thaddeus pulled his girlfriend closer, worried that she might flee to the elevator. As her embarrassment was beginning to wear off, Lorena suddenly realised she was overdressed for the occasion. She had confidently chosen a floor-length gown made of black velvet, but when she saw what everyone else was wearing, she felt self-conscious. Except for Gwendolyn's boyfriend, who was wearing some sort of retro costume, everyone was dressed casually. Gwendolen walked across the floor to meet the couple. She winked at her apprentice, glad that she had plucked up the courage to meet a daunting situation head-on. "Well, don't you both look lovely? Come and sit next to us. And Lorena, don't worry about it. Melchizedek, he doesn't bite." Gwendolen led Thaddeus and Lorena towards the table. Lorena shook all the hands that were extended towards her, and before she took her seat, she looked across the table and mouthed, "Sorry," to Melchizedek, who mouthed the words back, "No problem, you naughty girl." Justinian moved to a seat further along the table, and Gwendolen patted the now empty seat next to her. Lorena sat down, grateful that Gwendolen was being protective. Gwendolen materialised a glass of something milky, and Lorena quickly reached for it and gulped the contents without a thought to what she was drinking or how unladylike she might appear. This made Thaddeus laugh, but suddenly remembering where she was and who she was with, Lorena felt even more self-conscious. Gwendolen tapped Lorena's foot under the table with her own, and the affirmation, "You're all right," appeared in her apprentice's mind. Lorena began to feel better, not exactly comfortable, but better. Her glass was empty, and she would have liked some more of the sweet, milky cocktail, but she was too shy to ask. Lorena, sandwiched between Gwendolen and Thaddeus, quietly observed the hierarchy into whose company she had been thrust. Thaddeus held her hand under the table. Lorena was trying her best to be inconspicuous, but as she listened to their chatter, she concluded that those sitting around her were more normal than she had expected. They were not ethereal or aloof in any way. If she had cracked a joke, she knew they would have laughed. If she had told a funny anecdote, they would have trumped her tale with another. Nevertheless, the combined energy in the room was exceedingly potent, and she found it unsettling. Low or high-grade energy was difficult to bear when one's own vibration was incompatible. That's why the higher realms of spirit could not be accessed by those on the lower levels of ascension. One would, figuratively speaking, be blinded by the light. "Lorena, honey," said Gwendolen, "why don't you take a little walk with me? The view from up here is out of this world, and tonight the sky is positively alive." Gwendolen stood and moved along the table in search of Justinian's mouth. They kissed in a way that suggested they were departing each other's company for the next 300 years. Happy for the distraction, Lorena inched her chair back from the table, not realising that the hem of her dress was caught under her foot. As she lifted her bottom out of the seat, the noise of tearing fabric silenced the conversation around her. The side seam of her gown had split wide open. Lorena gasped, and her mouth agape she promptly sat back down, mortified. Melchizedek looked on amused, but didn't say anything, and Cain politely looked away. Thaddeus leaned towards his girlfriend's ear and whispered, "It's okay, no biggie." This did little to console Lorena, whose body temperature had sharply increased. Her face now flushed. Lorena wished she was at home in bed with the covers over her head. In spite of her previous thoughts to the contrary, she did not fit in, and what might have been an exciting evening had turned into an embarrassing nightmare. "Relax, baby," whispered Gwendolen, who had brought what felt like a sea breeze into Lorena's immediate vicinity. This cooled her instantly. Cain cleared his throat. He had never before addressed the apprentice. "Lorena, you must never worry about such mundane trivialities, let alone be disturbed by them. Right now, on the planet that you see orbiting before you, women are dying in childbirth. Countless souls have just had their limbs blown off in battle and will bleed to death, and many others throughout the day have been tortured, 70% of whom will not regain control of their minds. Hundreds of thousands of souls are dying painful deaths of cancer and other body-devouring diseases. Millions are starving, and many thousands more are dependent on drugs to annihilate their pain. And that is just the tip of the grisly iceberg. In order to rise through the ranks as comfortably as one is able, a proper perspective regarding drama must be cultivated. And with regards to the predicament your torn gown has presented you with, Gwendolen might be able to help you with that." Lorena no longer felt embarrassed, just small and ridiculous. It was right then that Lorena's gown transformed into a slinky jade-green cocktail dress, perfectly form-fitting and hemmed to a couple of inches above her knee. It was cinched at the waist with a belt identical to the bracelet Thaddeus had given her earlier that evening. Lorena wiggled slightly in her seat, aware and thankful that she now had underwear on. "That's much better," said Gwendolen. "You have gorgeous legs. And don't worry, Lorena, they're not granny panties." Lorena started to giggle, and then didn't care that she wasn't able to stop. For the first time since walking into the observatory, a sensation of self-possession swept over her, and she no longer felt trapped by her own awkwardness. The energy in the room was no longer intimidating. Everything just seemed happily frivolous. "Thank you so much, Gwen, and I love this dress. Can I keep it? Oh, and I will never leave home without underwear again." And thank you, Kane. Tearing my dress really does not compare to bleeding to death in a ditch, knowing that the circling vultures above you have already honed in on your eyeballs. She said this with all the drama of a bad Shakespearean actor. Kane laughed, as did everyone else. Thaddeus smiled lovingly at his girlfriend. She looked beautiful and poised, and her self-assuredness was now palpable. The entire incident had only lasted a few seconds, but Thaddeus knew that Lorena had just been tested. Melchizedek caught Thaddeus's eye with a look that said, "She asked for it," and then resumed his conversation with Salvatore across the table. Thaddeus was glad that Melchizedek had decided to restrain himself. Things could have been much worse for the young apprentice. "Lorena," urged Gwendolen, "you really must see the stars. The energy in this room causes them to act in a way that you haven't seen before." Lorena smiled and stood up again, this time gracefully, and allowed Gwendolen to escort her to the southern wall of the observatory. With a rush of astonishment, Lorena saw what Gwendolen meant. The night sky was ablaze, as if the stars were in competition to see which could be the most vibrant. The glory of the moment confounded Lorena to the point that she wondered how she might ever enjoy her everyday existence again. Gwendolen knew the names of even the most obscure stars, and after naming several, she then pointed to the one that had alerted the Magi to the birth of the baby Jesus. The many millions Lorena could see twinkled at almost blinding levels of intensity, but then her attention was suddenly drawn to just one. She squinted. The star was small by comparison to the many in its vicinity, but it seemed to be flashing at regular intervals. Lorena's gaze was intent and her awareness laser-focused. Gwendolen located the part of the constellation that had just captivated her apprentice's attention. She wanted to see what had caused Lorena's aura to change colour so dramatically. But all Gwendolen could see was what she always saw, the unparalleled and indescribable brilliance of celestial creation. The feeling that the star was somehow communicating with her made Lorena feel conspicuous, but she did her best to hide her astonishment. But as the seconds passed, she recognised that she wasn't losing her mind. Somehow she knew that the star wanted her attention and was trying to convey something. But what was it saying? Why could she not break her gaze? With a heavy and deliberate blink, Lorena closed her eyes and opened them again, certain that she could relocate the tiny star among the throngs of others. And there it was, the beckoning beacon that tugged at her soul. Gwendolen noticed that Lorena was wavering and put an arm around her waist to steady her, concluding that she was not used to such high-grade energy. In that instant, Lorena knew she must go. Go where? She felt like a tiny nail being pulled by an enormous magnet. But she resisted the urge to tell Gwendolen of her newfound feelings of what? Destiny? From within her core, an upward rise had replaced a downward tug. But Lorena had no idea of what had just occurred, just that out there, far, far away, something or someone was calling her. Gwendolen kept her arm around Lorena's waist. Her energy levels were soaring and dipping, then stabilising and then fluctuating again. And it was then that Gwendolen realised Lorena was not of human origin. Melchizedek was deep in conversation, but aware of what had just taken place. The timing had been perfect. All his creations were destined to intermingle. Could Lorena fulfil the role as unifier? Alicia thought she could, but Kane was sceptical, but then he always was. Lorena certainly had the qualities necessary. She naturally put people at ease by her own timidity. Indeed, she was not aggressive or even pushy in the least. And her seemingly paradoxical sense of adventure had recently been confirmed. Lorena would have to be properly trained, and she would have to come to terms with her heritage before any discussions regarding her calling could take place. This might not be easy. She was born on a fallen planet that had only just been released from quarantine. Salvatore was talking to Kane about some recent happening concerning a lost soul who had not responded to treatment, and Justinian was telling Alicia about his upcoming mission that would require he be deposited at the Old Bailey, probably in a toilet stall, he told her. The trial is open to the public and the Lord Mayor is due to make an appearance but is stuck in heavy traffic. Hungry Fleet Street reporters are already camped outside. Apparently the fiasco is being dubbed the case of the century. "Sounds like a blast," said Alusha.